Welcome to a story that history tried to bury. Tonight, you're about to step into the year 1858, where a man named Daniel stood powerless as his wife and children were sold right in front of his eyes. A moment so cruel it shattered his world. But what Daniel did next was something no one expected, something that still unsettles historians today. Before we go deeper, tell me in the comments where you're watching from, and if you value stories built on deep research and true historical records. Make sure you subscribe, because uncovering the truth behind stories like this takes countless hours of hard work and dedication. In 1858, America stood on the edge of a moral and political collapse. The nation was not yet at war with itself, but the tension was unmistakable, thick in the air, woven into everyday life. The country was split between two opposing realities, one that spoke loudly of freedom and human rights, and another that depended entirely on the buying, selling, and breaking of human beings. These two Americas existed side by side, yet they were worlds apart. The southern states were built on an economy that treated enslaved people as property, not as families, not as souls. Men, women, and children were valued by age, strength, and obedience, their worth written in ledgers instead of recognized in law. Public slave auctions were common, held in town squares and marketplaces, where crying children could be torn from their mothers without consequence. Pain was normalized, and cruelty was protected by tradition and legislation. In contrast, the northern states were rapidly industrializing and growing increasingly vocal in their opposition to slavery. Abolitionist movements gained strength. Newspapers spread uncomfortable truths, and speeches challenged the nation's conscience. Yet even in the North, racism thrived, and freedom was fragile. The Fugitive Slave Act ensured that no escaped person was truly safe, allowing slave catchers to hunt across state lines with federal support. Politically, America was fractured beyond repair. The Dred Scott decision had recently declared that Black Americans had no rights a white man was bound to respect, sending shockwaves through the nation. Violent clashes erupted in places like Kansas, where pro-slavery and anti-slavery forces fought openly, proving that compromise had failed. Fear, anger, and suspicion replaced unity. For enslaved families like Daniel's, 1858 was not just a year. It was a daily sentence of uncertainty. Marriage held no legal weight, parenthood offered no protection, and love could be erased with the strike of a gavel. In this divided and brutal society, survival itself was an act of resistance, and hope came at a dangerous cost. Before the auction shattered everything, Daniel lived a life defined by quiet endurance. He was enslaved, owned by law, but within the boundaries forced upon him, he built something deeply human, a family. His days began before sunrise, working long hours in fields or labor yards where exhaustion was expected and pain was ignored. Yet every night, no matter how broken his body felt, Daniel returned to the only place that gave his life meaning, his wife and children. Daniel's marriage was never recognized by the state, but it was real in every way that mattered. He and his wife shared whispered conversations in the dark, small plans for the future, and a hope that somehow their children might survive a world designed to crush them. He taught his children what little he could, how to stay quiet, how to read people's moods, how to endure. Love, in Daniel's world, had to be practiced carefully, because loving too openly meant having more to lose. He was known among others as steady and dependable. Overseers valued him for his strength and obedience, unaware or unconcerned that behind his silence lived a man who observed everything. Daniel learned early that survival depended on restraint. Anger could get you killed. Tears could get you separated. Silence, though painful, kept families together, at least temporarily. But beneath this fragile stability was constant fear. Enslaved families lived with the knowledge that nothing they built truly belonged to them. At any moment, death, or profit could tear them apart. Daniel knew this. Every laugh with his children carried the weight of uncertainty. Every peaceful day felt borrowed. Before the auction, Daniel was not free, but he was whole. He was a husband, a father, and a man clinging to dignity in a system designed to erase it. What he did not know was that this fragile life, held together by routine and hope, was already marked for destruction. The slave market was not hidden in the shadows. It was public, loud, and disturbingly ordinary. In 1858, these markets were held in open courtyards, near warehouses, or along busy streets, where everyday life continued as if nothing cruel was happening. Merchants called out prices, buyers inspected bodies, and paperwork changed hands, all while human lives were reduced to numbers and measurements. The air was thick with dust, sweat, and fear. Enslaved people stood in rows, some shackled, others forced to smile to appear valuable. Children clung to their mothers, sensing danger they couldn't fully understand. Husbands tried not to look at their wives, knowing eye contact could make separation even more unbearable. Every sound, the crack of a whip, the bang of a gavel, the rise of a bidder's voice, felt like a countdown to loss. Buyers moved casually, discussing strength, age, and obedience as if they were choosing livestock. Teeth were checked, muscles were squeezed, scars were judged. There was no shame in this place, only routine. Laughter from nearby taverns mixed with crying from the auction floor, creating a chilling reminder of how normalized cruelty had become. For those being sold, time moved differently. Seconds stretched into agony. Each bid carried the possibility of permanent separation, families torn apart with no appeal, no warning, and no mercy. A child could be sold to one plantation, a mother to another, a father to a third, all within minutes. This was the atmosphere Daniel stepped into, a space where humanity was stripped away in plain sight. The slave market was not just a location, it was a machine of destruction, designed to break bonds, erase identities, and remind every enslaved person that love, family, and stability could be taken at any moment. The moment came without ceremony, without warning, and without mercy. Daniel stood in the crowd as the auctioneer's voice cut through the air, calling out numbers that decided the fate of his entire world. His wife was pulled forward first. Her name didn't matter here, only her age, her strength, and her price. Daniel tried to hold her eyes, to give her some sense of comfort, but armed men stood between them, reminding him that even looking too long could be punished. When the bidding ended, she was claimed by a stranger. Just like that, no goodbye that mattered, no time for words. She was turned away and led into the mass of bodies, disappearing from Daniel's sight as if she had been erased. The sound that escaped her, half cry, half prayer, stayed with him long after she was gone. Then came the children. One by one, they were dragged forward, confused and terrified. Daniel's youngest reached out toward him, screaming his name, but Daniel could not move. Chains, guns, and laws held him frozen in place. To step forward meant death. To speak meant punishment. To resist meant never seeing them again, yet he was already losing them. The crowd barely noticed. Bidders argued over prices. Clerks wrote receipts. The auction continued as if nothing extraordinary was happening. But for Daniel, time collapsed. In a matter of minutes, his family, his reason for surviving each day, was gone. When the gavel struck for the final time, Daniel was no longer just enslaved. He was emptied. What remained was a man standing in silence, surrounded by noise, staring at a future stripped of everything he loved. And in that silence, something changed, something dangerous, something that would soon make history uncomfortable. When the auction ended, Daniel did not scream. He did not fall to the ground or beg for mercy. Outwardly, he became what the system expected: silent, obedient, unremarkable. But inside, everything collapsed at once. The image of his wife being led away, the sound of his children crying out, replayed in his mind without pause. Grief hit him like a physical blow, leaving him hollow and unsteady, yet forced to stand upright as if nothing had happened. In the world Daniel lived in, visible emotion was dangerous. Tears could be seen as weakness. Anger could be met with violence. So Daniel learned to bury his pain deep, letting it harden instead of break him. Each breath became an act of control. Each step was measured. His silence was not acceptance, it was survival. Among other enslaved people, there were no words that could ease such loss. Everyone understood what had happened, because it could happen to any of them. Glances were exchanged, heavy with shared suffering, but no one dared speak openly. Grief was a private burden, carried alone even when surrounded by others, yet within that emotional collapse, something else began to form. A quiet resolve. Daniel stopped reacting and started observing. He listened carefully. He memorized faces, routes, routines. His stillness became a shield, hiding thoughts that could cost him his life if discovered. This was not surrender, it was preparation. In a society that expected broken men to remain broken, Daniel's silence became an act of resistance. While the world believed it had taken everything from him, it failed to see the one thing it could not own: his will to act. In 1858, the law was not a shield for people like Daniel, it was a weapon used against them. Every rule, every statute, every courtroom decision existed to protect the institution of slavery and punish anyone who dared to resist it. Escape was not just dangerous, it was designed to be nearly impossible. The Fugitive Slave Act meant that even if an enslaved person managed to flee to a so-called free state, freedom was an illusion. Slave catchers were legally empowered to hunt fugitives across state lines, backed by federal authority. Ordinary citizens could be fined or jailed for offering food, shelter, or silence. Helping someone like Daniel was a crime, turning him in was rewarded. Passes controlled movement. An enslaved person found traveling without written permission could be whipped, imprisoned, or killed on the spot. Patrols roamed roads at night, armed and alert, stopping anyone whose presence looked out of place. Dogs were trained to track human scent. Notices offering rewards for runaways were printed and distributed within hours. Even families who tried to stay together faced legal erasure. Enslaved marriages had no standing. Parents had no legal claim over their children. An owner could sell, trade, or punish without explanation. There was no court to appeal to, no testimony that mattered. The law did not recognize Daniel as a man, only as property. This legal cage was intentional. It crushed hope before action could even begin. By making escape almost impossible, the system aimed to break the spirit as thoroughly as it controlled the body. For Daniel, every path forward was blocked by law, violence, and fear. Yet it was within this suffocating reality that he began to consider a choice so dangerous it defied the rules of his entire world. After the laws closed every visible door and fear pressed in from all sides, Daniel made a decision that few dared to even imagine. It was not sudden or reckless. It formed slowly in silence, shaped by sleepless nights and memories he could not escape. The system expected him to break, to accept his loss and continue living as a hollowed-out body. Daniel refused. He understood the risks better than anyone. Any attempt to search for his family, to run, or to resist could mean torture or death. Failure would not just end his life, it would serve as a warning to others. The consequences were designed to be public and brutal. And yet, doing nothing felt like another kind of death. To remain still meant accepting that his wife and children were gone forever. Daniel chose action over survival. Not loud defiance, not immediate escape, but something far more dangerous, purposeful patience. He began gathering information in fragments, where traders traveled, which plantations bought families, which routes were watched and which were ignored. He listened more than he spoke. He worked harder than required to avoid suspicion. Every step was calculated. This decision isolated him. He could not trust easily. One careless word could destroy everything. Even those who pitied him come out of fear or for reward. Daniel carried his plan alone, knowing that secrecy was the only protection he had left. What made his decision truly dangerous was not just the risk of death, it was the challenge it posed to the system itself. A man who had lost everything was no longer easy to control. In choosing to act, Daniel crossed an invisible line, transforming from a victim of history into a threat to it. Daniel's journey to reclaim even a sliver of control over his shattered life was filled with a precarious balance of trust and danger. In a world where speaking the wrong word or showing the wrong face could be fatal, finding allies was nearly impossible. Yet some did exist. Other enslaved people who quietly resisted, sympathetic strangers, and even a few who had tasted freedom and risked everything to help others. These allies provided small but vital assistance, secret directions, hidden food, warnings of patrols, and occasional safe places to rest. Every act of kindness carried immense risk. Daniel learned to read signals carefully, to judge who could be trusted and who might betray him for a reward or out of fear. One wrong move could undo months of careful planning. But betrayal was never far away. Traders, overseers, and even neighbors watched constantly. Some pretended friendship only to report Daniel's movements. Others manipulated him, offering false hope that led to dead ends or ambushes. Each betrayal cut deeply, reminding him that in 1858, loyalty was rare and survival was fragile. Daniel's path became a tense navigation between courage and caution. Every interaction was a test. every whispered secret a potential death sentence. And yet, these fragile alliances were his only chance to act against a system designed to strip him of everything. In the midst of fear and deception, Daniel learned that trust could save life, and that misplaced trust could cost it. Every act of resistance in Daniel's world carried a cost, and his was no exception. By daring to defy the system that had taken his family, Daniel risked far more than punishment for himself. He risked retaliation against anyone who helped him, and even more, the possibility of permanent separation from those he loved. Defiance in 1858 was not symbolic, it was survival threatening. Even a small misstep, a whispered plan overheard, or a misread signal could provoke a violent response. Whippings, imprisonment, and public humiliation were standard tools to enforce obedience, and death was always a looming possibility. For Daniel, every movement, every decision was measured against this brutal reality. But the true price of defiance extended beyond the physical. It demanded mental and emotional endurance that few could sustain. Fear became constant, trust became scarce, and solitude became his closest companion. Each act of courage drew him further into danger, yet it also reinforced his resolve, proving to himself and the system that he could not be completely broken. In this world, defiance was a double-edged sword. Daniel's choices might bring liberation or death, success or even greater heartbreak. But to remain passive would mean surrendering the last piece of his humanity, the will to fight for his family, for love, and for dignity in a society that denied him all three. Daniel's courageous defiance did not come without immediate consequences. The system he challenged was relentless, designed to punish any sign of rebellion with severity. Word of his actions spread quickly among overseers and traders who were eager to make an example of anyone who dared resist. Every move he made was now watched more closely, every contact scrutinized, and every ally put at risk. He faced physical danger at every turn. Patrols and slave catchers became more vigilant, ready to strike at the first hint of escape or subversion. Daniel had to navigate a landscape where a single misstep could mean capture, brutal punishment, or even death. Pain became both a threat and a constant companion. But the consequences were not only physical. Socially, he became isolated. Friends and fellow enslaved people, fearful for their own safety, hesitated to help him. The betrayals he had already faced intensified, as some were coerced or tempted into turning against him. Trust became a currency more valuable than gold, yet harder to find. Emotionally, the weight of these consequences was crushing. Every calculated risk he took to act for his family amplified the fear of failure. Every moment of vigilance drained him, yet he pressed on, driven by a force stronger than fear, the refusal to let injustice define the rest of his life. In the end, Daniel's consequences were a constant reminder to challenge the system was to live on the edge of survival, with every heartbeat a defiance of the world that sought to crush him. Daniel's story, like so many others from the era, entered history in fragments, sometimes celebrated, often overlooked, and occasionally erased entirely. Official records of enslaved people rarely preserved personal names, acts of courage, or moments of resistance. To the authorities and traders, Daniel was merely property, and his defiance was inconvenient to document. Some accounts survived through oral histories, passed quietly from one generation to the next. Stories of his courage were whispered among family members, neighbors, and fellow survivors, ensuring that even when official records were silent, the memory of his actions persisted. Yet these stories were often dismissed, fragmented, or altered over time, leaving gaps in the full truth of what he endured and accomplished. Historians who later pieced together such narratives had to navigate these gaps carefully, relying on letters, court documents, and rare eyewitness accounts. Daniel's bravery, though remarkable, was at risk of being overshadowed by the broader atrocities of slavery, blending into the anonymous suffering that defined the era. The selective recording, or erasure, of his story reflects a broader reality. History often remembers the oppressors and the laws that enforced cruelty, but it rarely preserves the detailed accounts of individual courage. Daniel's actions survived against the odds, a testament to human resilience, but the fact that they required reconstruction highlights the injustice of a system that tried not only to destroy lives, but also to erase their very existence from memory. Daniel's story continues to resonate because it embodies the extremes of human suffering and courage. Watching his family torn from him, yet finding the strength to act against an unforgiving system, reminds us of both the cruelty humanity can inflict and the resilience it can produce. His life challenges us to confront the realities of history that are often sanitized or ignored. The haunting aspect is not only the injustice he endured, but also the mystery of his actions, the courage, the ingenuity, and the risk that allowed him to defy a system designed to erase him. Even today, his story sparks questions. How far would someone go for love? What does it take to resist when every choice carries mortal danger? Daniel's example forces us to grapple with these uncomfortable truths. It also serves as a reminder of the countless, untold stories of those who suffered in silence, whose names and deeds were lost to the pages of history. Daniel's resilience illuminates what was often hidden, that even in the darkest circumstances, acts of defiance, courage, and love persist, leaving a legacy that transcends time. Ultimately, Daniel's story haunts us because it is both personal and universal, a testament to the enduring human spirit, a warning of systemic cruelty, and a call to remember those who fought, suffered, and survived against impossible odds.